Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hey everybody, Susan, I'm your host of Innovation Storytellers, and we're back. I would say I'm thrilled, but this is a different experience. I love having conversations about the outside in, what it looks like from people outside the jar, actually get to crawl inside of the innovation jar and stir things up, make things happen, and really help set large companies on a path to turn what's inside into really valuable and marketable products. And sometimes it's taking great know-how from the outside and bringing it into that jar, new ideas, new products and services that maybe large companies hadn't even conceived of yet. And so that's why I'm beyond excited, beyond thrilled to have two amazing consultants with me on Innovation Storytellers today from U+, Sheppard and Beránek, who are going to talk to us about what it's like to step up to a very large company and do one of two things. Give a large company the opportunity to take a big, deep breath of relief and know that their amazing innovation is going to be handled from the outside so they can focus on whatever's going on the inside, or to bring in decades of innovation experience into a large company and say, how can we help? And so it's that ethos that U+ brings in a very specific framework that I think is really exciting for innovation leaders to talk about how to do that. So first of all, let me ask this question. Sean and Jan, how did the two of you meet? How does a guy from the Czech Republic and an American innovator, who's predominantly on the West Coast, how do you find one another in this crazy world where life is changing 100 miles an hour?
We were in the same building in San Francisco. I was running my venture fund and I was doing my startup accelerator and my school to train people to work in the startup community, and started getting dragged into corporate innovation by the enterprise clients of some of my startups. And the biggest problem I had was I was great, we were great and successful at helping them commercialize these technologies, but they weren't very good at building them. And a mutual friend had connected Jan and I was looking for someone, an organization that really knew how to build startup technologies, not just develop products. And so they connected us, and I actually was a customer of Jan and U+ before I became a partner in the business.
Wow, fantastic. So Jan, give us a little bit of background. You started this business. Tell us about the impetus for starting U+ and what it is, what makes it distinct from other innovation consulting firms out there.
Sure. U+ is a corporate innovations venture builder. That means that we bring new businesses to the market for large corporations. We've done it over 90 times in the past, let's say 7-8 years, to the tune of $1 billion of market value for these companies. We have a large, super international team. We have 23 nationalities in our team. COVID transformed us into being a little bit more hybrid as well, increased our talent pools. So super interesting people who always worked in startups. And that is the mentality that we bring to new innovations and corporations.
And you are dedicated to building new products and services for large corporations. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So give us a little bit of background, Jan. So you started this business, correct me if I'm wrong, age 14, is that right? Was that when things got started?
Yeah, thank you. So I started 12 years ago. I'm 32. I started when I was 14. So coding, designing, learning everything from YouTube, how to do things in Photoshop, and literally coding on paper even before. And for me, it's always been a vessel for learning, to learn something new. And that you can see that thread from starting in the Czech Republic and going to New York, and we were in China as well, New York, and then ultimately San Francisco. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. And that's how we got to Sean, right? But what makes us different is we have people who have worked in startups, we're around startups. We've built over 90 businesses at this stage, right? So we have that experience of having seen it, being on the film set when things happen. So when we come in and start working on any sort of innovation with the company, we will likely have seen some of the challenges or a lot of the challenges that the company has and can speed up the process and de-risk it significantly.
And so that idea of working, you strive with 14 as coders. I can't tell you what a regular phenomenon it is on this show to hear people who start off in innovation who are coding from day one and then decide, let me find a place where I can put this. That is not the typical path. So where was the desire to take like really large organizations and say, there's a way to turn this battleship, at least a part of it, into a speedboat?
I think there's a path there, right? So started coding and designing then and basically self-teaching myself. I started U Plus when I was 20. I studied 2 universities at once because at the computer science one, they told me I know more than they're going to teach in the early years. So I wanted to learn something new. I just continued doing my coding stuff, etc. And then I tried to go to BCG and McKinsey and I didn't get there, which is great ultimately for me. And there was a moment where my mindset changed from very like tech focused to how many pages do you want on this website to, so why are you doing this? And who's the customer? What's the target? What are you trying to sell? And it was also around that time when the big marketing agencies started doing digital as part of larger campaigns, but they didn't have anybody in-house that would be sort of digitally native who could take that over. And I was just there, right? So that's how U Plus started at the very beginning when we work with the larger agencies. But that's a very repetitive work. Like it's a very campaign focused work. Every month, every 3 months, your work is thrown away and there's no legacy is even a big word. It's like there's no continuity. There's nothing you can point to other than the billboard from half a year ago. So we naturally started gravitating towards some bigger, longer lasting things. And we looked in 2 places. One was startups and the other was corporations. And naturally, corporations are a little bit longer lasting. We tried, and in Europe, we focus heavily on corporations because we had those connections and it was easier. And venture building in Europe has been a necessity sort of because of the lack of large ecosystem to invest in for 7 years, 8 years, or something like that. In the US, it's just now, or maybe the past couple of years, has been rising pretty significantly. But when we first entered the US market, we focused on startups and slowly navigated to corporations because that's where the help is needed. That's where the biggest budgets are. And that's the most sort of predictable revenue for us, turns out to be.
Yeah. And where innovation really has an opportunity to grow and scale at a massive level.
Yes.
And what about you, Sean? How did you come into the world of innovation?
Yeah, I've been a tech entrepreneur my whole life. I've started 5 companies in Silicon Valley, had 3 exits, launched 3 venture capital funds, a global accelerator for startups that was focused on helping them find product market fit, and then a school to train people to work in tech companies in Silicon Valley. And then got dragged into corporate innovation quite by accident. And that's when I met Jan. And I'm happy that I did.
And so now the 2 of you are partners in U Plus, is that right?
That's
Running
right.
a business together.
Yes.
Fantastic.
We've grown 500% this year alone. It's been pretty remarkable. We all know now in the age of COVID that digital is a top priority for many because they can't see their customers in person. So how do you create in-person experiences in a touchless way? And that's a big part of the business that we build.
Yeah. So it's not just about building digital products, right? It's really understanding, and both of you have this very keen awareness of deep product market fit and incorporating that into the process from the very beginning.
Very much so. It's all about building new revenue streams or enhancing existing revenue streams through technology.
Fantastic. That was great. Sean, how does a corporate innovator know when it's time to look outside the 4 stone walls? Like, how do they know? And what should they think about looking at a consultant for their innovation work, especially if they already have an innovation team?
Well, there's the practical, most common answer, which is when the things they're doing aren't working. And then there's the ideal answer, which is they have a growth mindset and they recognize that they don't know what they don't know about building new things and taking new things to market, especially non-core things. Physical businesses looking to build digital products or services. When they recognize that their customers are going in a certain direction and they're not bringing them with them, that's when they need to raise their eyebrows and say, hold on, how can I lead going forward. But until then, I need to do what we advocate for a fast follower strategy.
Okay.
And I've written a piece all about this, which is pay close attention to what your users, and we call everybody a user because they use your product or service. Everybody who's using your product or service is using technology in certain ways today. It's part of a standard ritual of their daily lives. How can you insert yourself into that to build a stronger relationship and retain and grow your customers over time? So look closely at what they are doing within the ecosystem. What other tools, technologies, and behaviors are they exhibiting that you're not a part of that maybe you should consider being a part of? And then go build those things. The challenge, of course, is they don't necessarily have the right stage relevant teams with the right mindset, skill set, and execution framework to do that. They often hire the BCGs and the McKinseys of the world to tell them what to do for the next 3, 4, 5 years, but they don't actually have the people to do it. And that's when they should be looking for outside help.
And we've had stories of companies spending, $100 million new innovation and then acquiring 500 customers, not 500,000, 500 period. So allocation of capital and the know-how that's sometimes internal and the need of, or was not built here sort of syndrome kind of goes against them sometimes.
Let's talk about that not built here syndrome. I can hear the engineering team clamoring with pitchforks and torches in the background going, that's what you hired us to do, to build it. So let's back up a little bit and talk about your framework, because for my listeners who are new to U+, it's an opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an opportunity for innovation leaders to say, let's design it, let's think about it, let's test it, but let's build it elsewhere so that our time is focused on the right stuff internally. Am I getting that right?
I would say so. I would come back to what you said about the engineering team, that they said that's what we were hired for.
Yeah.
And I would say that's not really true. They were hired for maintaining and growing an existing machine, existing product, existing business. And that's a very, very different skill set, no lesser skill set than building something someplace new and getting it someplace new. So, and the pace and the sort of shortcuts that you need to take that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable when you're in a big corporation and everything once in a million happens every 7 seconds. You have to have a different sort of mindset. So, but it's a part of the discussion that we typically have, right? And we work with the internal engineering teams, and they always want to take the stuff over so we comply with whatever needs to happen. But our outcome is a functioning business rather than the technology. Technology is just manifestation of the insights that we come across when we do the market testing. But in terms of the overall process, the methodology, we always say knowing the theory doesn't mean that you know how to execute on it. So that's why you need people who have done this before. Right, at minimum, we start seeing people who've been in startups, entrepreneurs, or something like that as heads of innovation, which sort of helps us because then we can show quicker how these things are done. But in terms of the methodology, what is the most expensive thing that you can do? It is decide that you want to do something, build a tech around it that typically takes a long time, and get it in front of customers, and then nobody uses it. Right, and then when you want to pivot, you need to rebuild the whole tech. Right, because you're already in the market, you already put yourself out there, and then it becomes a costly situation for you, not only in terms of money, but in terms of PR. That's when we say people stop, or product managers stop managing the product and start managing their careers, right, which is one of the behaviors that's there as well. So our methodology is basically built from what we've seen in startups. It's a version of a lean startup methodology. Try to test as much as possible, understand what the customers really want. And we say we don't try to build any tech or anything costly until we know that there's somebody who would pay for that version of the idea that we're testing, right? So we're heavy on user research, prototyping, even desktop research, looking at what others are doing in the startup world and corporate competitors all around the world. Because, for example, if you're in a regulated industry, that determines a lot of what you can do in terms of innovation as well. And then we try to do sort of multivariate testing of different versions of communication style, branding, pricing models, pricing itself, different sets of features, right? And then we pit all of them against each other to really understand what does the business case look like for each one of them, or the best cases. And then that gives us the best idea of what to continue with. And maybe the answer is there is no place for this product. Typically, we find a way, and then it's about, is this business case strong enough, or do we want to continue? And only then we commit to building whatever needs to be built. But typically, the tech is not the limiting factor. It's understanding what needs to be built.
Maybe you can give us an example, because we're talking in the theory right now, right, of figuring out exactly what is that product that needs to be built? What is that prototype? What does that market research look like? But give us a real world example, because most of my listeners are folks with innovation in their title, product managers, chief product officers, and customer experience and user experience folks. So we're all hungry for seeing it in action. What's an example of this U plus process being applied to a product?
Jan, you want me to give it a shot?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the largest Canadian retailers was trying to figure out a way to expand its footprint without expand its customer base without expanding its physical footprint. And they had a lot of success at selling warranties and insurance and other financial services products in store, and wanted to figure out how to be able to take that same idea and those same products and services and sell them online to expand their reach. And what we learned through our research was there weren't legal restrictions to them selling these products and services beyond the borders of Canada. So we launched a series of products and services online that could sell warranties and insurance products for equipment, even if the equipment wasn't purchased in their stores, regardless of where it was purchased and when and what condition it was in. And it
So I'm clear, this is not the guys calling me about my extended car warranty. That's not a
No.
U plus innovation. Is that right? I'm hoping. Please say yes.
That's correct. That's correct.
Good.
And these are digital products and services. No one's calling you.
It would have been an email, Susan.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Got it. Thank you. Just so I know exactly what I'm looking for. Fantastic.
But the idea was to expand their reach and create a whole new revenue stream outside of their physical stores. And so we launched with one single product. We learned where that product fit in the market. And then we started to add other products, such as not just warranties and insurance products, but a community for those people to get together and create commerce amongst each other, as well as an online learning community for them to continue to educate themselves in their particular fields. And it's just been a very successful way for them to expand their brand beyond the Canadian borders and create a series of new revenue streams outside of the stores. And fortunately for them, we launched all this pre-COVID, so it had a significant impact on helping them survive those times.
Wow. Massive, right? Especially when you're in lockdown. And that's even, there's something really gratifying about giving a client a revenue stream that really saves them during a very tough time. I mean, retail was so devastated.
Yeah, and they had an innovation officer who came from marketing, and we see this a lot, and that's great. But they didn't really know, once again, they didn't have a team, they didn't have a framework, they didn't know where to start. And so we worked with them and coached them and brought them along and built this program. Like many organizations, they had a great internal IT organization, but they'd never launched customer-facing digital products and services. They had a great marketing organization who knew how to do digital marketing, but didn't know what products and services could be launched and what should be built and how to build it and how to manage that process. So there was a big gap in the innovation cycle for them. And so we were able to come in and bring the product team, the market team, the design team, the commercialization team, and do it all as a sort of, like we like to say, non-dilutive co-founders in the startup effort.
So talk to us about the results of that undertaking with this Canadian retailer.
Well, since then, they've launched a venture business, and we have a whole portfolio of different ideas that we plan to launch over time. And we're working concurrently on 3 different projects at the same time, the existing one plus the others. And we slowly start to transition those back into the organization. So much so that the technology that we built for outside the business is now going to be used in store to automate the transactions that they've been doing manually all these years in store. And it's a significant revenue stream for them. And it's one of their highest margin businesses in the store.
So do you think having outside consultants who come in and talk about, okay, we know you want to innovate, you've done really innovative things in the past, but doing this kind of innovation is new to you and actually requires expert hands. Do you think that is a tough conversation to have? Is it a tough conversation to have to get the board on board, or when they say, look, we have all these talented people, why do we need a U plus to do this?
Well, it's mixed. Those that recognize the need move very quickly, and we have a lot of success with, especially if they behave the way that they say, their actions follow their words. And if it doesn't, it certainly can and is often a challenge. And sometimes you can tell somebody the stove is hot, but they have to touch it themselves to experience it. And they need to go through that process. And a lot of our clients are people who've been trying to innovate for many years in this way and just have not had a lot of success or getting what we call traction. Because to us, innovation isn't about the idea, it's about the adoption in the market by your customers. It's not truly innovative unless they say it is.
Until the market finds the value in it.
Innovation is all about adoption,
Mm-hmm.
period, end of story. And so we work from adoption backwards. 80% of our time focused on the customer, the user, their experience, their problems, how those can be solved using technology, and then work our way back and reverse engineer it. That way you de-risk the heck out of these things long before they're ever built. The first 4 months of our methodology, we're not writing any code. We're not building any product. We're spending time with customers, the ecosystem, the teams inside the organization, and we're connecting all the relevant dots to find out what has the highest chance of being adopted in the shortest period of time possible with the least amount of resources.
So that said, I mean, it's still a big question mark. We want to de-risk innovation wherever humanly possible, but we don't know if the adoption, can we actually predict the adoption rate? Tell us
Well,
about
I would argue that you can to a certain degree. That's all part of our market testing and validation work early on, is we spend enough time with statistically large enough cohort of their existing customers and or prospects to understand what they are willing to adopt, make data-driven decisions based on that.
So if we innovate anything, we know we failed. At some point in time along this process, we know that we can't get necessarily from point A to point Z in the way that we had hoped. Can you give us an example where you've encountered this isn't going to work, guys, discussion?
I would say the cadence that we have, or how it's useful to talk a little bit about how we work. So we try to form cohesive new teams. We have 4 different skill set: tech, design, product, and market. That we always say that we need to find a stage relevant skill set. So very early on, you need a lot of researchers. Later on, you need growth marketers, things like that. And what's 100% the most important thing for us in a collaboration is transparency, because we need to move really fast and then information needs to flow both ways. So we ask for one person we call the accountable leader, who's sort of on the boundary of the corporation, who can get us the resources that we need. For example, if they're early customer board, or if they have some internal assets spread across US, for example, that we need access to people who work in those places. And we're sort of testing that particular market. But as well, are working with us on a daily. So we have a cadence of daily stand-ups. So we create a completely new team. We have daily stand-ups. We have weekly meetings to look at where the project's going. And then also super important is to have set reporting up the chain, right? So we have steering committees every month or 2 months, because a lot of innovation gets killed because the higher ups don't understand the pace, what's the expectations, what's going to happen, what's the plan, and get the real data from the market tests to see that it's going in the right direction or not, but so that the project doesn't get killed because people don't understand. So we literally connect our Slack or our Teams. Our customers have access to every single person on our team, and we communicate daily. So to get back to your question, we have those conversations on a daily, and we try to be very straightforward, because we know that this is a part of the reason why we were hired, right? It hasn't worked before, or we're there for de-risking and speeding the process up. So we have to be direct, transparent, and straightforward. So those discussions happen every single day.
Hey, it's Susan here. Like what you're hearing so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So thank you for being here. Whether it's your first time or you're 10 episodes deep, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do with innovation leaders, head over to susanlindner.com for more information. I'm always open to a conversation to learn how I might better support you. But for right now, let's get back to the show. Yeah. And yet, we still might get to the point where we say, sorry, guys, this isn't going to scale. This isn't going to fly, right? To the best of our hypotheses, everything we thought would work, market's not ready, or we don't have the manpower, the execution ability, et cetera, to make this happen. Can you give us an example of where failure is just part of the process, and we learn and we keep going.
Right. Failure is definitely part of the process. And I think there would be a failure to execute. There would be failure to find the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think how we should look at that failure. But again, repositioning, is it a failure to stop a project that you would have sunk, a million cents or millions of dollars into, and you wouldn't know that it won't fly, that there won't be a market? So of course, it's a difficult discussion because money has been spent. But we would argue this is a success because we've prevented you wasting your money and lives focusing on a product that's not going to have any traction, right? And it's better to take that budget, the broken window or broken glass fallacy, right? It's much better to not have the window broken and focus on other things rather than focus on that and have somebody fix it for money.
Yeah. So is there an example you can give us of that, of where we just couldn't find the right market for what we were trying to do? I was really hoping you were going to say your Canadian example was Tim Hortons, and that, you were going to launch some incredible new donut that didn't have maple in it, and that we could talk about the failure of that donut in particular. Every Canadian reference to me comes back to like Molson Golden in high school or a Tim Hortons donut while I'm in a Toronto airport. But
do you have a good example, Sean? I'm thinking.
There's several, right? I can think of one in the automotive space where there was this idea that this particular product would work in a particular market. And through the market validation and testing process, we were able to find out that the product was good, but not for that market. And we pivoted it off to a different customer segment for initial launch. And I think that's really important too, is that we're not always looking for, let's call it Mr. Right customer, as much as we're looking for the Mr. Right now. There's a different mindset, psychology, and sort of needs-based situation that certain customer segments are in when you're taking something to market for the first time. And the goal is to find the people that have the immediate need and are willing to do really three things for you: give you their time, tell you the truth, and be willing to take the risk necessary to learn. And so some segments are more ready for that and have, let's say, more of an early adopter mindset than others. And it doesn't mean that the initial hypothesis about a particular product in that market won't come to fruition and won't be real at some point. But who's willing to work with you when you don't have a whole and complete product? That's why we always talk about innovating at this stage is not about selling a product to a market. It's about recruiting partners who share in your vision, understand your current reality, and are willing to take the risk and give you the time and the truth you both need to learn together. And so there's some sort of strategic reason. Like I always say, especially in business to business selling, there's only 4 reasons why anyone buys, right? Make more money, save more money, create or maintain a competitive advantage, which is what you're looking for in an early partner. And then my favorite is stay out of prison, risk, compliance, liability. And then there are always emotional reasons why someone would justify a business reason to work with you, no question, right? If the heart believes, the head will follow. But in order to justify the business case inside the organization, there has to be a logical reason. And the one that most early adopters have, if you pay attention and speak to them, is they are looking for a competitive advantage in some way, shape, or form. They see that down the road, there will be an order of magnitude transformation or change in what they do, how they do it, and what that means to their metrics if they take that risk with you today. And those are the only folks that you want to focus on when you go to market. The problem is that most organizations think about everything. They assume that that's already a thing. They actually don't even know that that's a thing. And they assume that just because they're already customers and they already have a relationship, that their mainstream market players are willing to do that with them. They're not necessarily. And we're not necessarily asking them the right questions early on to uncover whether or not that's the case. We just assume that they will. And as a result, they have a really hard time getting early traction for any of these ideas. And what they think is that just scale will solve the problem. Well, if we just build it big enough for everybody to use and then give it to our existing sales force or marketing team, which is also another challenge, because the mindset and behaviors of the people that have been selling what you already have are not conducive to selling something new. And we oftentimes see that hurt existing sales and productivity and kill morale, when you should have a specialized team that's just focused on the learning curve. And then once that learning curve has been established, you've gone through it, and you know now you have predictable, profitable, scalable business in front of you. Now you can talk about how do you build a team around that. The existing force, do you bring in a new force? Do you do some blend? What do you do based on what you've learned? I can't tell you how many times I've seen things fail because they've handed new ideas to people who are used to running existing ideas.
So let's talk about that, because the title of the show is Innovation Storytellers, and that is squarely the story. Who is going to be the story bearer to take the news, the good news of the new innovation to the market, and how will it be presented? And so for me, this is God's work, right? This is the figuring out exactly, okay, we've built it. They're not going to come unless we're convincing and have some kind of messianic desire to bring this brilliant new idea to people. And it may just be incremental, but it still feels terrifying to engage in a change. And we all know this experience of going to the supermarket and needing Haagen-Dazs ice cream and only finding Breyers. Like, when you need Haagen-Dazs vanilla, there's really no mistaking anything else for it. And so the agony that ensues, needless to say, I don't know why I have so many food references today. But
I was going to say donuts and ice cream this early. I love how
Monday morning.
I haven't had breakfast yet, and I'm only on my first cup of coffee. You'll notice my mug says you're on mute. So
That's a perfect mug.
yeah, I realized that I need to incorporate donuts and ice cream into my morning routine. That's really, I think, what my trainer wanted for me. So, but what we're talking about is that story. So tell us about, you've gotten to this place, right? You are convincing the board effectively that we think we got it. And now it's time to bring that story to the market. Tell us about the story, for example, that when you talk about this Canadian retailer with their warranties and insurances, how did you figure out what the new story was going to be for a customer base that wasn't accustomed to interacting with them digitally, that was suddenly going to buy products from them online, or even a whole market downstairs, not in the upstairs of Canada, but in the downstairs on the main floor here in the US, who were suddenly going to, why were we going to buy these things again?
But with respect, there's a fundamental flaw in how you just talked about that. And this
Okay.
is what most organizations run into.
Mm.
They've built something, they've convinced themselves inside the building that it's going to work. And then they want to convince the people inside the building, the other people inside the building that have the power to give them the resources and the runway they need, that it's going to work. And they haven't spent enough time or the right time or asked the right questions of their market first to make data-driven, informed decisions. So we do the opposite. We flip the script and we go out to the market. We ask questions first and we build later, not the other way around. And then based on that market data, and I don't mean desk research, right? Desk research is fine and it's important and it's good to give you just genuine general trends about where a market's going and what's happening. But now you need to go out and talk to humans. And you need to have those real conversations with them about to validate your hypotheses or iterate on them based on what you've learned. The scientific method sounds trite, but trust us. When people are seduced by their own ideas or by people who express interest in what they're doing, they throw that scientific method out the window in a minute. Their cognitive bias drives them down a certain path. And before you know it, they've convinced themselves and now they're trying to convince others. And they're not looking for information, they're looking for affirmation. And so we flip the script and we say, okay, you've got a series of hypotheses. Let's go out and test those things with actual prospects and customers in your market and spend a significant amount of time going deep with them as opposed to wide to truly understand who they are, what they care about, what problems that we could solve for them, what the value exchange of that would be, how that translates into a unique value proposition, unique selling proposition, and then eventually into a set of features that go into a product to manifest the solution for them. And then at that point, it's time to go back and start telling the story. But you do it with data.
But data only gets the mind so far. We need to involve the heart. So where's the narrative that rises up to join that, aside from just the data?
Certainly, there is an initial value hypothesis that is a general narrative that talks about how the game has changed and how we need to respond to that change in this way, and then what that will result in. And then you use before and after stories with those early customers to say that this is what we think things will look like based on what we've learned. And as a result, this is what should be built. And then here's the opportunity beyond that. But also recognizing that learning curve is longer and more arduous than they might think or want it to be, because they think about everything at scale. And they think if you just flip the switch, everyone's going to adopt it. And they don't think about change and change management and the biggest barriers to change. The biggest barrier to change in any organization is work. The idea is if you want to create change, you've got to create less work, not more. And you've got to give people an easy way to make change. And that needs to manifest itself in the product or service that you're bringing to the market, especially with technology today. It's all about that experience. Amazon's not the most valuable company in the world because of what they make, but because of what they make easy.
Yeah, there's that piece. And I think, the process that you have lends itself, I would hope, helps executive kind of build a narrative. But what I did hear you say is that, or maybe I'm just inferring, part of the narrative is about helping the end user even overcome their own fear of making the shift. Because I think the worst saying that was ever brought to the marketing table was, if you build it, they will come.
Mm-hmm.
And I curse that movie daily for people thinking like, I can just build a product and people will figure out how to get it and it will be fine. Because even the slightest iteration on a product can really cause people immense distress and confusion in the market. I was working with a big laundry detergent company, and I think we've all heard new and improved Tide a million times, right? I don't know how many more times you can newly improve Tide, but Procter & Gamble figures it out. And Consumer Reports just voted them the best detergent again, And yet a slight shift in the product packaging will send consumers into a tizzy. I was working with one of their competitors and just figuring out the priority of lighting clean, fresh, or smells great in what order was a many weeks debate. And then throw COVID into it. You're like, well, which one of these matters most now? Even the time and situation. So the story at the marketplace, even though the product has gone through an incremental shift, although substantive, that communication in very, very fine lines makes a huge difference. So you've got me thinking about a lot of things, because the presentation of the story to the boardroom and the presentation to the story to the market might look quite different. The convincing that needs to get done, the story of influence that needs to be told.
They're very different because they care about different things. They also speak a different language, right?
Yeah.
We all speak English doesn't mean we speak the same language. So the message to each user type is very different. So when you break down what we do, we create a different initial value proposition and selling proposition for every buyer type, user type, and influencer, both on the market side and inside the organization. Most of these things fail because of markets and people, not because of products and technology. And when I mean people, I mean the people inside the organization that don't understand it and don't support it or kill it because they don't prioritize it, and the people running process because they may not necessarily know how to communicate it. You have to find product market fit, not just with your customer, but you have to find it with your internal customers, your internal stakeholders. You are a founder of an idea. You have investors, and those are your bosses and your bosses' bosses and your bosses' bosses' bosses. And you need to pitch them and convince them the same way as me, a 5-time founder with 3 exits, have had to convince venture capitalists to give me money, as well as convince customers to give me money. And so you have both sides of that story that you have to manage and play. It's not easy by any stretch, but storytelling, as you know, is a critical part of that.
Yeah.
And we have it built in to the methodology. Like I said, we have preparation for steering committees and this reporting up to chain. A lot of times it is about connecting to the expectations and the KPIs for a particular quarter or a year of that innovation, right? And managing that discussion and set expectations for the future so that progressively these discussions get easier and easier, right? And they get used to the level of detail and data that we can produce while building something new. So with your Tide example, we would be the ones who would build the subscription to your Tide every single day, every single week, sort of business online, rather than figuring out how to position the words against each other. And our goal would be to convince the board that this is how you probably make more money, or you get better customer relation, or you reduce some part of inefficiency in your supply chain with unpredictable demand or things like that. Right?
So I have a couple of hot seat questions for you. Every week on my podcast, I ask my guests a couple of questions about where their innovation longing comes from. So, what do you think, if I were to ask you, what are some of the most impactful innovations in human history? What do you think about? What inspires you?
The wheel.
The wheel, that's a good one.
The wheel and the internet.
We'll get really groundbreaking there.
Right? That's all I have.
Yeah, there you go. Done. Mic drop.
Hygiene in anything that's created hygienics for humans. Look what it's done just to change life expectancy and reduce early death in children and women, especially, to me, has been probably one of the most important things. I was going to use internet. He stole it from me. But I can go back to the printing press and Johann Gutenberg, too, and say that was the beginning of the spread of mass information. The internet's just the newest version of it.
As you're reminding me about hygiene, I'm thinking about that book, Germs, Guns, and Steel.
Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yes. It's a fantastic book.
Fantastic book about how these three minor innovations, additions to human history.
Yeah. Really, and right now, at this time, I think germs, everybody's talking about germs, not guns and steel.
Yeah. We do talk about them, but they're usually at the worst moments in time, for sure.
That's right.
So what about your favorite? Like, what innovation just makes you smile?
Good one. Jan?
I think it's the iPhone, really. I think that's been such a change in the past 14 years, right? I remember when I had the first one, how transformative that was and what kind of behaviors enable. Of course, there's a dark side to it, that you spend too much time on it and you spend too much time on social media. But the amount of power that everybody has and access to information now, and of course with any other smartphone, but being able to miniaturize everything to the level that you can put that computer in your pocket. One thing that makes me smile is there's these, and I want to buy those, there's these levitating pots for plants.
Yes.
They probably take a lot of energy. And when we buy a house, what I'd like to do in the garden, do an automation when you like walk into the garden and everything starts flows up. When you want to spend time in the garden. So I think that would put a smile on my face.
I'm reminded of that story of the Buddha when he took his first steps on the earth and lotus blossoms popped up with every step he took in his path, right? Illuminating his own enlightenment. So
this is the cyberpunk version of that.
There you go. Very similar. I think the Buddha would approve. Well done. Yeah. So if you could join any innovation team, present or past, what innovation team would you have loved to have been on?
Well, I would have loved to have been in the room with the founding fathers, because to me, the greatest innovation, one that makes me smile, is freedom.
Yeah.
Until then, individuals didn't have freedom.
And many of them didn't in that moment either.
No.
It would take a whole lot longer for them to still encounter that or be given those.
I would have loved to have been in that room. That would have been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one more, just projecting to the future. What's missing in your life? What innovation needs to be there that you don't have yet that you wish, God, why hasn't someone invented this yet?
I'm sure Jan's got some good ideas about that one.
I think it's digitizing and simplifying the government and bureaucracy and the way we elect people who represent us and the way you interact with the government. So I think that's something that is fundamentally convoluted right now. And I don't mean in the US, like everywhere, right?
Right.
So I think that is due for a big overhaul, but it's a very sticky process and not conducive to much change. But I think if there's something that economically and in everyday lives people benefit from, it's like automate, digitize everything that you can in the government so that people can actually live their lives and not submit forms and fill in stuff that they don't understand.
The New York Times did a big piece on this exact thing, and it was the intentionality of bureaucracy to slow down human progress in getting services from the government, how the intentional roadblocks established and the time and toll it takes, especially on caregivers when people are in health crises and what that looks like. So it's really big when you're trying to file those insurance forms, those Medicaid or Medicare forms with the government. It's cruel almost is what the article wound up perceiving. I asked my 93-year-old mom this question: what's your favorite innovation of all time? And she's like, those dishwasher soap pods. I don't have to pour the dishwasher soap anymore. She's like, there is nothing finer. I said, you've been on the planet 93 years, and this is the best thing ever. She said, without a doubt, dishwasher pods. So,
well, I would hope that one day soon, mine's probably going to be controversial because I think, especially with the Gates Foundation's new innovation around nuclear energy, the ability to create clean and safe nuclear waste from a nuclear power plant, I think it can solve the world's energy problems fairly quickly.
I would agree.
And there's a fantastic book called Apocalypse Never that people should take a look at, and watch the Gates documentary that talks about how he innovated, brought a team together into the foundation to innovate around nuclear energy to create safe waste, and was about to launch it before
the trade war
started to happen, and they were going to actually test in China. I don't know where it is right now, but I'm hoping one day soon that gets a lot more attention, because I think it could solve the world's energy problems and move us away from things like coal and filthy energy.
Yeah, the nuclear fission reactors that are in use now and sometimes are being built still are like 1960s best technology.
Yeah.
So there's a reason I understand why people are worried about that, but there's so much more innovation that has happened. And I think it's like with climate change, people just need to feel it a little bit more and see how it doesn't work. And then more money is going to be poured into it. And next gen reactors are safe and there's no meltdowns and things like that. And it's very clearly, objectively, if you take all the emotion out of it, it's very clearly the way to go. Yeah. I'm going to be even more controversial, Sean.
Well, don't get me on my education innovation soapbox, because that's the whole other one, is that the entire education system needs to just be torn down and rebuilt from the bottom up and rethought for today's marketplace. And corporations and employers are actually doing it. If you just look at the Google Classroom environments and what they're doing to create certifications and bypass the massive bureaucracy of big education. And I applaud that, and I hope it continues to go in that direction.
Agreed. As long as we don't give up the humanities as part of education, because this anthropology and religion major certainly uses both of those things every day in her work.
I completely agree. So technology is removing humanity from humanity, period, right? We stand behind our screens and we're less human than we've ever been. When people ask me, what are the skills necessary to be successful in the future? Humanity is right at the top of the list. I tell my kids who are now in university, if I had it all to do over again, I would study anthropology, economics, philosophy, psychology, right? And critical thinking skills and coding skills. And I think those are the things that are going to matter most in the future.
I met a lady in San Francisco who studies, or maybe has been studying at Berkeley, and I asked her what she was studying, and she said a combination of sociology, biology, and like AI, computer science. And I said, this is just such a perfect mix of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Neuroscience, I'm hearing a lot of too, even as part of the biological sphere. But
just to understand human behavior.
Yeah. Like it or not, we still have to interact with each other. It's funny when I ask people in a workshop, what's your favorite thing about Uber? And they're like, you don't have to talk to the driver anymore. And I was like, yeah, people suck, right? And I go, they do. And they kind of, I'm like, I was being sarcastic, but you were being real. Meanwhile,
remember 10 years ago when Uber started to disrupt cabs, and they did it because people didn't like the way cab drivers treated them.
Right. And it's funny because I can't tell you how many stops I have missed in a taxi by talking to the cab driver about, so what do they eat for breakfast in your country? Because I can't turn off the anthropologist in me for even 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That I have to. And I'm astounded by the fact that people don't want to have that conversation with their cab driver, but I've come to realize it's inherently me, I think. Well, guys, thank you so much. So if people want to get in touch with UPlus and find a way to innovate, maybe even outside their walls or stretch the walls that they're currently in to think about innovation in a new way, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys at UPlus?
Well, they can certainly go to our website at u.plus or usertechnologies.com. If they're not familiar with the .plus TLD. They can certainly follow us on LinkedIn. They can connect with Jan or I on LinkedIn, or follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We're all those places. Happy to have a chat with anybody who's interested.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. This was fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that an innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlinder.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.